Hello and welcome to Devlog number 9. It's been a busy last couple weeks for me. I did not get as much done on the game as I had hoped to because I was busy moving from Hawaii to Seattle, but I did make some progress that I'm going to talk about in this update since it's been a while since my last devlog. The really big news is that it's not just me working on this anymore. I've taken on board 2 more people, some old friends. Marshall, who is a sound designer and Foley artist, and in case you haven't noticed yet, there is currently sound in the background of the game, and we'll get to that. And also Stefmo, who did the map that you're seeing right now, and he's come on board as just the general modeling and texture artist. And so I'm really happy to have the 2 of them. They're going to take a lot of load off of my plate and do things that I can't do, period. So I'm really looking forward to what that's going to mean for the future of the development. In terms of the sounds that have been added, there's a couple of UI sounds. You just heard one of them. There's a new track sound, that ping when a track shows up. There's also a similar sound when one disappears to kind of give the user an audio cue so that they know when they're picking up new contacts, because previously they had to be paying attention to the whole screen, and if they didn't happen to catch it pop up, then they wouldn't know that it was a new contact. There's a bunch of other sounds that have been added outside the UI. There's engine sounds, there's a general droning for the ships, there's missile launch sounds, there's gun sounds, and impact sounds, which sound awesome, and you'll be seeing those pretty shortly probably. So the first thing that I did when I got back to really working on this in the middle of my move, once I'd kind of gotten a little settled, was fixing a number of the bugs that had shown up during my last multiplayer test. And the weirdest of which was the fact that I could see the height indicators on the sensors view for ships that I didn't have tracks on. So you can see these ones here show me how far off the plane these contacts are. But imagine that these icons weren't here. I could still see these lines, and so it was kind of a cheating thing that a player could see that. And basically what it boiled down to was when a ship is picked up by sensors, it sends an event to other components to tell it that it can now be seen, and the team number was not being sent correctly. So when I was playing against 2 other players and they picked each other up, the notification saying that these ships were now visible on sensors was being sent to me instead of them. So that was some really weird behavior, but it's fixed now. When I got back to actually developing features, one of the first ones that I got to was a point value system, and I was waffling back and forth on whether I wanted a point value system at all, because there's so many other restrictions on the ships, things like power requirements, crew requirements, etc., that I wasn't sure if a point value system as a restriction method was really valid. But I did some thinking about it, and I decided that I did want it because it would give a way for players to gauge the effective power of their fleet rather than being a limitation. So instead of imposing a limit on the player where you can only have this number of points on your ship or in your fleet, it'll now be when a player comes into a battle, you can see that they have a 1,500 point fleet, and you can estimate the relative power of that fleet compared to yours. And you can, as the game host, set your own restrictions on whether or not, or on what the ceiling of a point value for a fleet is going to be. Another thing that I changed was a change to how the debuff system works. So previously, the way debuffs worked was they were these scripted objects, and every component for the ship that I made had a table in it of debuffs that could be randomly affecting it, like fire, electrical fire, power short, that kind of thing. But the problem was that a lot of these components have the same set of values available, or the same set of debuffs that can be applied to them. And so what that meant was that every time I made a new component, I had to add fire and other things to it. And so I reworked how debuffs work to use a little bit more of the reflection that I've been using on some other things like the stats. And so now the debuffs have a base class that they apply to. So hull component, fire applies to hull component because everything can have a fire in it. Crude components can have atmosphere leaks. Power components can have bus shorts, that kind of thing. And so now every component can have its own table of unique debuffs that can be applied to it, but on top of that there's just general debuffs that affect everything, and I don't have to manually add them anymore. So that's a real boon. You'll also notice some changes in the UI in the form of the sensor tracks. So you'll notice that the icon is no longer jumping around, but this little thing in the center is. And that's because I noticed when I was playing myself that it's really freaking hard to right-click a track if you want to target it, because it would be jumping all over the place, especially when it's a low accuracy sensor like the one I am using right now. And so now it shows you exactly where the ship is, and I didn't have this originally because I was worried that it was going to make it so that the players could target things really easily even if they didn't have accurate sensor data. But if the enemy player is staying mobile like they should be, I don't really think it'll be an issue. It gives a nice stable contact for the player to right click on or to select. And so now this jumping dot shows you exactly where the sensors think it is. So you get kind of both things. And then when I lock this target, that dot will jump to the center, and so it's a little more clear that this is a locked contact. Now let me start shooting some guns at this guy so that you can hear the new changes to the sounds. So this boom sound, the Doppler effect on the shell streak, I think that sounds really good. When you actually take hits, the impact sounds are pretty awesome once the gun recycles. And I wonder if we'll get a ricochet here so you can hear the ricochet sound, but it doesn't look like it. But so the sounds, I think, go a long way towards adding one of the major missing components to making combat satisfying, which was the oomph factor. Hearing the pings and the crashes, the missile sounds we'll get to in a second. When a component gets destroyed or when a ship takes a lot of damage at once, it creates kind of like this groaning metal sound that sounds like a submarine about to be crushed, which is really cool. So let's shoot a couple missiles at this guy. And you'll notice there's a couple more missile types there, but we'll get to that in a second. I just want to show you a little bit of the damage rebalancing. So that's it. That took 2 cruise missiles hitting in the right place to knock out the power and the command for this ship. It's pretty much done for with just those hits. And that's the groaning sound that I was mentioning. So what I talked about in the last devlog was that I thought it was really ridiculous that a frigate could shove off a dozen cruise missile hits like it's nothing and just be fine. And I think that really contributed to the fact that the ships would kind of last forever, and they're really not meant to. So what I did when I started the damage rebalance was I kind of tried to assess what was causing things to be so durable, because I could only lower the numbers of the hit points on the modules so much before you'd get a lucky hit and it would knock things out at once, versus other times it would just take forever to kill. And so I took a close look at how I implemented the damage system and tried to figure out what could be causing that. And if you remember from a previous devlog, I mentioned that when a penetrating hit occurs, it casts a ray through the ship to try to find what could it hit. And so this is the ray, and basically it's going through the hull trying to find a module to hit. And in this case, it didn't find any. The problem was that if you are, let's say this module right here is the CIC, if you're attacking from this angle, so previously the only thing that you'd be damaging is this radar panel, or if you came from this angle, you'd hit this compartment right here, and they were blocking each other because I was only taking the first hit from the raycast. So now what I'm doing is the damage is divided equally among all the components that the raycast hits. And so this ray damaged this module, and this module. It's and the one down here. So that hit is now doing damage to everything, and it's making it so that a module can't protect another module. It was especially egregious with the drive module here, these 2 big engines at the back. Unless you hit from exactly the right angle, it would not damage the drive module. So it was really, really hard to damage or to take out the drives of the frigate unless you were attacking from above or below. And especially the CIC, since it's so thin and it's blocked by other modules on almost all sides, unless you were hitting it from exactly this direction or this direction, it was pretty much protected. And so this change where the raycasts now go through multiple modules and do damage to multiple things that are in their way, it greatly reduces the durability of the ships because it prevents modules from protecting each other. And so once I had done the raycast changes, which I think improved the or reduced the durability of the frigates to a point where I thought they should be, I started looking at some other ways to make them, to bring armor more into the mix in terms of actually doing something, because the shells do a lot of damage to the components, but they also shouldn't do that much damage to the armor. So I added a new stat to the armor that's damage reduction. So when the armor takes a hit, it'll only take a certain percentage of that projectile's hit. And then there's also a component damage reduction, which some ships might have, but on the frigates it's 0%, so they won't take any damage off of the components on an impact. Now, you may have noticed when I was shooting missiles earlier that there's a number of additional missiles here. So the first one I added was this Interceptor Missile. So it's a small command-guided missile that will shoot down other missiles. So it's got a blast fragmentation warhead rather than an impact warhead. So it will approach the target and explode and attempt to destroy it with shrapnel, which is really good for shooting down other missiles. Command-guided means that instead of having an onboard seeker, the missile is communicating with the launching ship, and that ship's sensors are telling it where to go. So the difference is that if it overshoots its target, it can come back around and still aim for it, whereas just a normal seeker-guided missile will just continue off into the direction. So let me demo that. So I have launched a missile from the enemy ship now, which I just picked up. I'm going to send an interceptor for that. And it is going to fly towards its target, lead where it thinks it should be. If this is all based on the launching platform sensors, it's going to get in front of it, it's going to explode, and take the other missile with it. And so that's really good for taking out large missiles at longer ranges than just the lasers can do. And it's part of the expansion to the point defenses that I'm going to be working on probably in the next 1 or 2 sprints. So I added one more seeker, but I didn't think ahead, and it's not, I don't have a jammer on the other ship, but I added a home-on jam seeker. And so what that does is, if you're being jammed from a direction, you can just launch this missile in that general direction. It will pick up on that jamming signal and it will start flying towards it. And so it helps reduce the effectiveness of electronic warfare and jamming, in that it makes it so that you're no longer impervious when you are jamming an area. Because then if the enemy happens to have a home-on jam missile with them, then they can just shoot at you and they don't even need to aim, because your jamming signal becomes their homing signal. And then I did one more modification to the missiles to make them a little more easy to use based on what I was watching players and myself experience. It was really hard to aim the active radar guided missiles, and that's because the seeker cone was, I think, only 25 degrees, so I widened it by another 20, so it's now a 45 degree cone, so 90 degrees total, which gives a much greater probability of acquiring a target, but is also still requires some work to aim. Now, when you are aiming missiles by position, I made it so that it was a little easier to see where that seeker cone is. So when you are using the targeting widget, you can see now that there is a cone here, which is the cone in which the missiles will start looking to pick up their target. And so it's a lot easier to see where exactly the missile is going to be picking up its target. And that looks like another kill. So that looks like another kill. Only took 3 or 4 missiles to do it, which is what I think, as I said, the relative strength of the frigates should be to missiles. So I'm pretty happy with the way the damage is balanced right now. I think it'll lead to much shorter games, rather than just, the 2 fleets slugging it out with each other for 30 minutes like it has been in the past. I think their susceptibility to missiles will put a lot more emphasis on point defenses and decoys, so that the players don't just know that they'll be able to shrug off a dozen missiles. And now we finally get to see the battle report that I was talking about. So once the game is over, you get to see what the actual final status of all the ships that were in the fight are. And so this is the damage that I did to these 2 enemy ships with 5 or 6 cruise missiles, depending on how many I fired at them. I can't remember. But we can see that this one's crew dropped to 0, so that is what caused it to be eliminated. This one wasn't eliminated because it still had some crew, probably had the possibility of repairing one of these modules in order to bring itself back online in a limited state, even though all of its weapons were destroyed. So that's not as much as I wanted to get done over the last couple weeks, but it still is a fair amount. I'm pretty happy with the things that I did get to do, but obviously moving into a new house is a lot of work, and there's been a lot of other things that have been keeping me busy. But in terms of what's going to happen next, I really want to get some new ship classes and weapons into the game. I've spoken about this before. Right now I have a work in progress for a Corvette and a Destroyer, which I'm not quite ready to show yet. I also did some concepting for what I think I want the cruisers and the battleship to look like, and I'm pretty happy with the concept silhouettes that I have for that. I need to do an actual proper drawing of what I think they're really going to look like rather than just the silhouette. I also want to work on the movement model some more. Right now, all the thrusters are individual objects that can be individually damaged, but if you take one out, it doesn't actually affect the maneuverability of the ship right now, so that is something that I want to change, making it so that when all the thrusters in a certain direction are taken out, the ship has to turn fully in order to thrust in that direction rather than strafing. And I also want to get some more weapons in, just to kind of broaden the scope. I've added some more missiles. I want to add some more projectile weapons. I really want to get a beam weapon in. I don't know if I'm going to make it to that in the next 2 weeks. Probably not, since there's a lot of other things to do. But that is the progress that I've made since my move, and thank you for watching.